Namaskaram. Today I'm going to be talking about the path of bhakti and self-surrender. Bhagavan often used to say, bhakti is the mother of jnana. That is, without all-consuming love to surrender ourselves, we cannot annihilate this ego. So the key to to following the path that Bhagavan has shown us is bhakti. In fact, the path of self-investigation that Bhagavan has taught us is the very pinnacle of the path of bhakti. So I think it's useful to understand the Bhagavan teaching in the context of the path of bhakti, in its broadest sense. As Bhagavan says in the first clause of the first paragraph of Nāṇ Ār, Sakala Jivagalum Dukkam Embadindri Epodum Sukhamai Irika Virambo Vadalam. That is, since all living beings want to be happy always without what is called misery. That is the one thing we are all seeking is happiness. Some people may superficially say, oh, no, I'm not looking for happiness. I'm looking for what I want is I want to be very learned, or I want to do charity and be good, kind to people, or I want to become very rich. Or people may think they desire so many things, but whatever we desire those things because we think they make us happy. As Bhagavan says in the third clause of that first sentence, Priyataku Sukhame Karan Madalalam. That is, since happiness alone is the cause for love. That is, whatever we love or whatever we desire or whatever we like it because we think it will make us happy. So all our desires, the ultimate driving force behind all desires is the desire for happiness. That is our fundamental desire. And why do we all desire happiness? Because happiness is our real nature. Happiness is what is natural to us. As Bhagavan sometimes used to say, if we have a headache, why do we want to be free of the headache? Because a headache is unnatural. So if we have a headache, we don't feel comfortable until we get rid of the headache. When the headache goes and we are free of it, we then feel a relief, because we are restored to what seems to us to be our natural state. Of course, as Bhagavan said, even having a body is not natural to us, but a headache is something unnatural upon that unnatural body. So we will attain infinite and eternal satisfaction only when we are not only free of this body. This body comes and it goes. That is, we all know we're born one day, we die one day. But that's not the end of the story, because so long as we continue rising as ego, we will continue projecting one body after another. And it's an endless cycle until ego is brought to an end. So ego is not natural to us. Our natural state is just being, not rising as ego. So we will be perfectly happy only when we are free of the rising of ego. That is why we need to surrender ourselves. Surrender ourselves means surrender this ego, this false awareness, I am this body. So that is what we are all seeking, whether we know it or not. That is, we all know we're seeking happiness, but the fact that happiness can be attained only by surrendering this ego, that is not recognized by most of us. So when the mind is more immature, when the mind is more impure because of the strength of Vishaya Vasana, the inclination to go outwards, when they are very strong, we tend to we think happiness comes from external things, and we are trying to achieve things that we think will make us happy. If I have more wealth, if I have more power, if I have more wives or more children or more this or more that, then I'll be happy, we think. So and because of the impurity of our mind, we are more selfish. We are concerned only about our own happiness. So we seek, by hook or by crook, we seek happiness in any way. So even the worst sinners, even the most the cruelest people, the most vicious tyrants, and whatever they, I mean, even the most evil people, they are all seeking just what we are all seeking. We're all seeking happiness. It's just they think happiness will be attained if they can get all that they want for themselves. But as the mind is more and more purified, our orbit, our circle of concern starts extending beyond ourselves as a person. We not only want to be happy ourselves, we want our family to be happy. If our family are not happy, we will not feel happy. So for our own sake, we want our family to be happy, or we want our tribe to be happy, or our caste, or our religion, or our nation, or something like that. We identify ourselves with a certain group of people, and we want that group of people to be happy because that will make us happy. So slowly, our selfishness starts reducing, and we start becoming more concerned about others. So this is how slowly the mind is purified and matured. But during this process, we still are looking for things. We still want things that will make us happy. So we're still concerned about ourselves, even if we want our family to be happy, or all our people who are close to us in one way or another. We want them to be happy. Why? Because that will make us happy. So in life, we face so many difficulties. That is, we think if I get this, I'll be happy. But to get this, there are so many obstacles in the way. And so many things come that seem detrimental to our happiness. Disease comes, calamities come, bereavements come, so many things come. So we begin to understand that by our own strength, we cannot get everything that we want, and we cannot avoid all the things we don't want. So we begin to look for some help. And we think there is, behind all these things, what is it that decides whether I get disease, or whether I'm healthy, or whether I get bereaved? All these things, there must be some higher power behind all these things. So we begin to believe in some higher power, and we seek the help of that higher power, and we call that higher power God. And so we start in various ways, whether by Vedic rituals, or by puja, or by japa, or stotras, or dhyana, or in some way or other, we try to we try to seek the help of that higher power. And this is the same in all religions, and whatever be the religion, even the religions that are supposed not to have a god, like in Buddhism and Jainism, God is not a central concept. In Sankhya, God is not a central concept. But still, people are seeking the Buddhists will go to Buddhist temples where they have a statue of Buddha, and they think Buddha has the power to, just like people who believe in God believe God has the power to remove difficulties and give us what we want. They believe that the Buddha has that power, and the Jains likewise. They have their own Mahavira and other who they think can help them to achieve their end. So at the early stages of the path of bhakti, God is a means to an end. So that is not true bhakti. It's not Deva Bhakti, Ishvara Bhakti, it is Vishaya Bhakti. We love God because of what we think we can get from God. If God disappoints us, if God doesn't give us what we want, or if some calamity happens in our life, we think, oh, if God is not kind to me, we get angry with God. Because for us, God is just a means to an end. We've got certain expectations of God. If God doesn't match up to our expectations, then we get disappointed, and we even get angry with God. This is very immature, because we are still taking God to be a means to an end. God is not an end in himself. But after many janmas of this type of bhakti, slowly, slowly the mind is matured. And gradually we come to understand. That is, we pray to God, and God, some difficulties God gives us, but we pray to him and those difficulties are somehow or other removed, because no difficulties last forever. So slowly, slowly we come to understand even the difficulties are given by God for some good reason. And so we understand God is taking care of us. God is doing whatever is good for us. So slowly, slowly we come to the understanding that we are approaching God for what we can get from God. But greater, Sadhu Om has written a beautiful song, Kodu Tavam Perida, Aladinda Kodu Poru Perida. That means, which is great? Is the giver great, or are the gifts given great? Now, obviously, the giver is greater than the gifts. So when we come to that understanding that God who gives us all that we ask for, or not necessarily all that we ask for, but many of the things we ask for, and God who is taking so much care of us, is he not greater than all these things that we ask him for? So isn't it very petty of us to ask God for this or that? Rather than seeking, rather than loving God just for what we think we can get from God, when he's ready to do all this for us, how much love he has for us. So we should love him for his own sake. So slowly, slowly, the Vishaya Bhakti gives way to the genuine Deva Bhakti. We love God for his own sake. That is, we no longer are worshipping God just for what we think we can get from God. We are worshipping him for his own sake, because we love him, because he is doing so much for us. We accordingly love him, and therefore we want him alone. We cease to seek things from him, and we begin to love him for his own sake. Of course, this isn't an immediate switch. That is, slowly, slowly, this love for God grows, and the concern about other things diminishes. But still, when we're in difficulty, we still pray to God to free us from these difficulties. But generally, our mind is moving away from its desire for things, for Vishayas, for what we can get from God, towards love for God for his own sake. As our love for God increases, we that is, when if you, we can understand, give you an analogy of human relationships. If you genuinely love someone, you are not seeking to gain things from that person. You want to do things that will make that person happy. That is, if you love your husband and wife only because of the things that they do for you, and you're concerned only about your own, what you can get from a relationship, that is not genuine love. Right? If you genuinely love someone, what can I give to them? We are more concerned about what we can do for them than what we can get from them. So if we genuinely love someone, we want to do what will make them happy. So we try to understand what they want, and we try to align our wishes according to their wishes. That is, they may be interested in certain things that we're not particularly interested in. But because of our concern for them, we try to take interest in what they're interested in. We take interest in their life. And sometimes we sacrifice the things we want for the sake of making them happy. So in this way, we are slowly, slowly surrendering our will in order to make them happy. This is a nice analogy for what happens in our relationship with God. That is, we begin to understand that whatever God wants is what is best for us. So we want to want only what God wants for us. But then we find we still have so many other desires. We want this and we want that. So we begin to understand what stands between us and God is our own will. So we come, this is where the bhakti path begins to merge into surrender. We want to, because we understand that our will is standing between us and God. God wants what is best for us, but we still foolishly want so many things that we think are good for us. So we understand if we are to truly love God, we must be willing to surrender our will to His will. So we begin to try to give up our likes and dislikes and desires and attachments and accept whatever happens according to His will and is therefore best for us. Because if we have genuine love for God, if we have genuine trust in God, what is it we believe God to be? God is, and by definition, God is all-knowing, all-powerful, and all-loving. Because He is all-knowing, nothing can happen without His knowledge. Because He is all-powerful, nothing can happen without His consent. So whatever happens with His knowledge and with His consent. So whatever happens to us is according to His will. And since He is all-loving, whatever He wills is only what is good for us. So we may not, when sometimes bad things or what we judge to be bad things happen to us in life, sometimes calamities, bereavement, so many things that are painful for us happen. But if we genuinely trust God, we will understand, okay, I may not understand it, but God knows what is best for me. So if God is allowing this to happen to me, this is what is good for me. So we begin to try to give up our own likes and dislikes and desires and attachments and to accept whatever happens as being the sweet will of our Lord. As Bhagavan says in verse 2 of Śrī Aruṇācala Padigam, Ninishtam enishtam, your will is my will. That is, I have no will of my own. I only want what you want. Imbedaku, that is happiness for me. So we begin to, we try to surrender our will to the will of God. So this is in this way, but Bhakti is slowly maturing. First we were seeking only what we wanted from God, but slowly we want God alone. And then in order to be close to God, in order to be attuned to God, in order to give ourselves to God, the first obstacle between ourselves and God is obviously the first obstacle we recognize is our will, all our likes, dislikes, and everything. So we want to surrender our will. This is how the path of surrender begins, with trying to surrender our will to the will of God. However, so long as we rise as ego, we cannot but have likes and dislikes. It's inevitable. That is so. But once we have a separate, when we rise as ego, we have limited ourselves as this person. And once we are limited, we have certain needs. That is, this person we seem to be has certain needs. We need food, we need clothing, we need shelter, we need comforts. And so it's inevitable. But so long as we are limited, we will have likes and dislikes. Certain things seem to contribute to our happiness. Certain things contribute to our unhappiness. So we like the things that make us happy and we dislike the things that make us unhappy. So we cannot completely surrender our will so long as ego survives. Because what is the root of the will? It's only ego. That is, whose will is it? Who is it who likes this? Who is it who dislikes that? Who desires this? Who fears that? So all the will is only ego's will. It's we who have all these likes, dislikes, and desires, and so on. So long as we remain separate from God, we inevitably have, though we may be able to reduce the intensity and the strength of our likes and dislikes, we cannot be completely free of likes and dislikes so long as we remain separate. So as our bhakti matures, we come to understand merely trying to give up our desires, our likes and dislikes and so on, is not sufficient, because we're not able to do so completely, because the root problem is this ego. That is our feeling ourselves to be separate from God. And because of as our bhakti matures, our mind becomes more and more pure. That is, the strength of our Vishaya vasanas, our inclination to go outwards and want this and that they get reduced in strength, and so the mind becomes more mature. And as the mind becomes more mature, we become willing to accept that when we start off on the Bhakti Marga, we are a small little creature, and God is some very great power up there in heaven or outside. Somehow we take God to be something other than ourselves. And it's true, if we are this little person, God is something other than ourselves. But God cannot be completely other than ourselves, because if God is the infinite whole, nothing can be other than him. If we are something other than God, God is thereby limited, because he doesn't include everything. We are something separate from him. So obviously, if God is infinite, as all theists, all believers in God, they say, yes, God is infinite. But if God is infinite, then how can we be something separate from him? So God must be our own real nature. God must be what we actually are. So having a separate existence from God, that is the problem. It's not just our will. Of course, our will is a problem, but the root of that problem is this separate existence, our separate individuality. That is our ego, as Bhagavan put it in the one simple word. So ego is the problem. So then we want to surrender this ego. So how can we surrender this ego to God? As I say, we can reduce our likes and dislikes to some extent. We can try to attune our will to the will of God, but we cannot completely surrender it without surrendering ego. So surrender, as surrender becomes deeper, it is not just a matter of surrendering our will, though surrendering our will is necessary up to the end, because that's very necessary. But not only surrendering the will, we need to surrender this ego. So how do we surrender this ego? That is, so long as we rise as ego, we seem to be something separate from God, but we cannot be anything truly separate from God. Bhagavan has said it, a very beautiful verse in Āruṇācala Padigam, verse 7 in Āruṇācala Padigam. This is a very beautiful verse. Bhagavan says, Veli veliti ne mampala vuira virivaru Buddha bodhikangal veli oli unne andriindru enin veriyan a ulan. That means if the Bhutas, namely space, air, fire, water, and earth, and the bodhikas, that's everything made of these elements, which expand as many living beings, do not exist besides you. That if they're nothing other than you, the space of light implies the light of pure awareness. Nāṇ Ār ulan. Who else am I? So if everything is you, who else am I but you? Is what Bhagavan means. Then he goes on. Vimala veli adai ulatu veru ara bilangin veru ena veli varuvain are. O blemishless, if you shine without another in the heart as the space of as that space, that means the space of pure awareness, who am I who come out as if another? And then he ends with a beautiful prayer. Velivara Āruṇācala. Āruṇācala, come out. Avan talayil, that means on his head, that means on the head of this ego. Avan talayil virimala padatine vaite. Āruṇācala, come out, placing your vast lotus feet on his head. That means place your feet on the head of his ego and crush it. So our very rising as an ego is, how can we be anything separate from God? Our very rising as an ego is, we cannot be, even though we seem to be something other than him, we cannot be anything other than him. So this is when our bhakti matures to this stage, we want to give ourselves wholly to God. We pray to him, come out and put your feet, your vast lotus feet on his head and crush him. This ego who rises as if another. So, but in order to surrender this ego, we need to understand what is the nature of ego. This is what Bhagavan has. This is the priceless clue, the priceless boon that Bhagavan has given us. Bhagavan has revealed to us the nature of ego. That is, he's expressed this very beautifully in verse 25 of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu. What he's that is, he describes there, ego is a uru-vatra-peya-handya, formless phantom. So ego, it's formless because it's got no form of its own. It's a phantom because it's got no substance of its own. As he explained in the previous verse 24, the body means all the five sheaves are jada. Therefore, they're not aware of themselves as I. Satchit doesn't rise. But between these two, something calling itself I rises to the extent of a body. That is, we take this body to be I. So ego is neither the body, nor is it Satchit, but some spurious entity in between. Because it's not the body, it's got no form of its own. So it's formless. And because it's not Satchit, it's got no substance of its own. It borrows its substance from Satchit. The substance is its existence and its awareness. It is borrowed from Satchit. That is I am. It borrows I am from Satchit, and from the body it borrows a form. And it says, I am the form of this body. So ego is neither the body nor Satchit. So it's a formless phantom, but it cannot stand without misappropriating the properties of both. So what he says about this ego, it's a formless phantom, and how does it, if it's formless phantom, then how does it seem to exist? He explains, Urupatri Undam, grasping form, it comes into existence. Urupatri Nikam, grasping form, it stands. What is the form it grasps? First, it grasps the form of a body as itself. So first we take a body as I, and because we experience ourselves as a body, we consequently experience so many other forms. So having taken a body to be I, and holding on to this body as I, we then experience so many other forms. So he then says in the third clause, Urupatri Undu Mika Ongum, that is, grasping and feeding on forms, it flourishes. That is, once we've taken this body as I, we as this body, we depend on so many other things. We need food, we need clothing, we need shelter. So our attention goes outwards, and we're constantly seeking things that seem to us to be necessary. So the nature of ego is to grasp form. Since ego is formless, all forms are something other than itself. So grasping form means attending to anything other than ourselves is grasping form. So this is the very nature of ego, to be always attending to things other than itself. And then he says, Uruvittu urupatram, leaving one form, it grasps another form. That is because it cannot stand without grasping form. As soon as it leaves one form, it grasps another form. So if this body dies, we'll grasp some other body as ourselves. But then he gives the vital clue. Tedinal otum pidicum. If sought, it takes flight. That is, if ego begins to investigate itself, if it tries, instead of trying to hold on to any form, if it tries to hold on to itself, otum pidicum means it takes flight. It runs away. Why is that? Because since it cannot rise, stand, or flourish without grasping form, if it, instead of grasping form, if it tries to grasp itself, it thereby subsides and dissolves back into its source. So here Bhagavan Bhagavan revealed this in so many ways, but he put it very beautifully in this verse. The nature of ego is the ego feeds itself and nourishes itself by attending to things other than itself. If it tries to attend to itself, because it's got no form or substance of its own, if it tries to hold on to itself, it subsides and merges back into its source. What is its source? Its source is that Satchit, which never rises, which is the mere awareness I am, the fundamental awareness of our own existence. So how then can we surrender this ego? So long as we attend to anything other than ourselves, we cannot surrender this ego. So in order to surrender this ego, we need to attend to ourselves alone. This is why Bhagavan says in the 13th paragraph of Nāṉ Ār, which is the main paragraph I wanted to talk about today, because this is where Bhagavan has very, very clearly explained how we can bring about the ultimate surrender of ego. That is, as I said, surrender begins with surrendering our will to the will of God. But we cannot surrender our will completely without surrendering ego. So how can we surrender ego? How can we give ourselves to God? It's one thing to give. We can give up all we can give up everything belonging to us. But how do we give ourselves to God? This is the means that Bhagavan has revealed. That is because the nature of ego is to rise, stand, and flourish by attending to anything other than itself, but to subside and dissolve back into itself by attending to its source. In the first sentence of this 13th paragraph, what Bhagavan says is, Atma-chintana tavara, vera chintane kalamba vadaku, satram idum kodamal, atmanishta paranai irupade, tanne isanaku alipadam. What this means is, atmanishta paranai irupade means being as Atmanishta Paran. Atmanishta Paran means someone who is firmly established as themselves, as they actually are, as real nature, one's real nature. So being firmly established as we actually are. How can we be firmly established as we actually are? That he explains in the first clause. Atma-chintane tavira, vera chintane kalamba bhikkhu satram idam kadamo. That means not giving even the slightest room to the rising of any thought other than thought of atma-chintana. That's thought of oneself. Atma-chintana, though it literally means thought of oneself, it implies self-attentiveness. So what this clause implies, attending to ourselves so keenly that we thereby give no room for the mind to attend to anything else. Other thoughts arise only when we attend to them. If we're attending only to ourselves, we're not giving any room for the rising of other thoughts. So what he implies here, being so keenly self-attentive that we thereby give no room to the rising of any other thoughts, that alone is tanne isanuku aripadam, giving oneself to God. So if we want to surrender ourselves to God, by bhakti, even when we're still taking God to be something other than ourselves, we can to some extent surrender our will to him. To some extent, not completely, but we could reduce the strength of our desires and so on. But how to give ourselves to God? We can give ourselves to God only by this path of self-investigation. So the pinnacle of all spiritual practices is the path of bhakti. The pinnacle of the path of bhakti is surrender. And the pinnacle of the path of surrender is Atma-vichara. So that's why Bhagavan gave most importance to Atma-vichara, knowing and being what we actually are. To know and to be what we actually are, we must attend to ourselves. And by attending to ourselves, we are thereby surrendering this ego. So everything, by following this path of Atma-vichara, this is the culmination and the fulfillment of all other spiritual paths. That's why Bhagavan said, for example, in verse 14 of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu Anubandham, Vinayam vibhakti viyogam ajnanam, inave yaraku ena āindidutale. That's investigating to whom are vinay, that means karma, vibhakti. Here vibhakti is used, usually vibhakti means separation, but here it means the opposite of bhakti. It means lack of devotion. viyogam, separation, the opposite of yoga, which is joining. Viyoga is separation. Ajnana, ignorance. To whom are all these? These are all defects that we have now. For whom are all these defects? Investigating thus is itself karma yoga, bhakti yoga, Raja yoga, and jnana yoga is the implication there. So that is this path of self-investigation. This is the culmination of all other paths. And he says the same in verse 10 of Upadēśa Undiyār. Udita idatil odungi irital adu karmam bhaktium undipara adu yogam jnanam undipara. That is subsiding and being in the place from which one rose. That is karma and bhakti. That is yoga and jnana. In the Sanskrit version, he says, Kritstele mana svastata kriya bhakti yoga bodha cha nishchitam. That is, this is just keeping the mind subsided in the place from which it rose. That is all these paths. So the path of Atma-vichara is the culmination of all other spiritual paths. So, and most especially is the culmination of the path of surrender. We can surrender ourselves completely only by this path of Atma-vichara. That's why he says here, not giving even the slightest room to the rising of any thought other than Atma-chintana is giving ourselves to God. But then naturally we'll raise an objection. But I have so many responsibilities. I've got a family to look after. I've got work to do. So how can I how can I fulfill all my responsibilities if I'm not thinking of anything other than myself? If my attention is only on myself and I'm not giving room to rising of any other thoughts, then I'm going to be useless to my family, I won't be able to take care of myself. I won't be able to take care of my family. So then Bhagavan gives an assurance. Isan peril evelo bharate patalam avalavayum avabahitu kolkira. However much burden we place on God, he will bear all of it. What's that mean? Even the burden of thinking, we can leave to him. That is, on the path of surrender, we are trying to surrender ourselves completely. So surrendering ourselves includes surrendering our body, speech, and mind to him. What is to happen in the external world, and that is all the things that are to happen to us, as Bhagavan explained, these are already determined by prarabdha. We cannot change what is destined to happen. We cannot experience anything but we are not destined to experience. We cannot avoid experiencing anything but we are destined to experience. Not only that, as he said in the note he wrote for his mother, in the first sentence he said, Avarava prarabdha prakaram adakanavan angangirundu artavipan. What that means is, Avarava prarabdha prakaram means according to the nature of each person, according to the prarabdha of each person, that is, according to the destiny of each person, adakanavan. Adakanavan means he who is for that. That's a very nice way of referring to God or Guru, right? Ordainer of the prarabdha. So, for one who has given us this prarabdha, he who is for that, being there, that means being in each place, and implying being in the heart of each one of us, artavipan, will make us dance, will make us act. So in order for our prarabdha to unfold, it may be necessary for certain actions to be done by our body, speech, and mind. For example, supposing it's our destiny to become a doctor or an engineer or a professor or something, we have to study. And we have to pass exams and we have to get qualifications and everything. So since it's our destiny to become, say, a doctor, we have to go to medical school, we have to study, we have to pass the exams. So since it is our destiny, God will make us, me here means for body, speech, and mind will be made to do those actions that are necessary. So if we surrender ourselves completely to God, if we give no room even to rising of any thought, we are handing over our body, speech, and mind to him. So we are not interfering. He will make our body, speech, and mind do whatever actions they're destined to do. It's no concern of ours. Our only concern should be to think of nothing other than ourselves, Atma-chintana, to cling firmly to Atma-chintana. Then in the next sentence he says, Sakala karyam galayam or Parameshwara Shakti Nadati Kondirika Padiyal. That means since one Parameshwara Shakti is driving all karyas, what does he mean by karyas? Karyas means whatever ought to happen or to be done, whatever needs to happen, everything is being made to happen by his power. So in other words, the destiny, whatever he has, whatever prarabdha he has allotted, it's all being driven by him. It will all be made to unfold by him. It should be no concern of ours. So when such is the case, when whatever should happen, whatever needs to happen, he'll make it happen. So when such is the case, Namum Aduku Adangi Ramal, instead of we also yielding ourselves to it, that is, when he's driving all karyas, we can happily yield ourselves to him, because he will make our body, speech, and mind do whatever they're meant to do. But instead of yielding ourselves to him, Ipadēśa Avendum, Endru Sada Chintipadu Ain. Why should, instead of yielding ourselves to it, why to be perpetually thinking it's necessary to do like this, it's necessary to do like that? That is, we don't have to think about what we should do. We leave the whole burden to Bhagavan. He will make our body, speech, and mind do whatever they are meant to do according to prarabdha. And then he gives a very nice he gives a very nice analogy in the final sentence of this paragraph. Though we know the train is going bearing all the burdens, why should we who go traveling in it, instead of remaining happily, leaving our small luggage placed on it, I mean placed on the train, suffer carrying it on our head? That is, if we're traveling in a train, we may have some luggage with us. We don't have to carry the luggage on our head. If we carry the luggage on our head for the whole journey, we're going to be very uncomfortable. Instead of carrying the luggage on our head, we can just as well put the luggage on the luggage rack or on the seat beside us or on the floor or somewhere, and we can travel very comfortably. Because whether we carry the luggage on our head or not, the train is carrying the luggage. The train is carrying all the burden. Even the burden of the weight of our luggage and the weight of our body, everything is being carried by the train. So let's leave everything to the train to take care of. Likewise, everything is being taken care of by God. So we can confidently leave everything to him. So here Bhagavan is giving us a great assurance. We can leave even the burden of thinking to God. Leave that to him. We don't have to do anything. All we have to do is cling firmly to Atma-chintana, to self-attentiveness. If we do so, that is truly giving ourselves to God. And because we're giving ourselves to him, he will take care of us. He will do whatever is necessary. He'll take care of us, of our family, whatever we may be concerned about. Leave all the concerns to him, because he can take care of everything far better than we can. So this is a very, very great assurance Bhagavan gives us. And because I touched upon that what he says in the note, his note to his mother, it's very important to understand this note, to consider what Bhagavan wrote here very carefully, because this is also a very great clue in this path of surrender, and hence in the path of Atma-vichara. That is, in the first sentence, as I said, he says, according to the destiny of each person, God, or he who is to that, being in the heart of each of them, will make them dance, will make them act. That some people superficially say, take this to mean, oh, that means God, whatever we do, we're being made to do that by God. No, that isn't what Bhagavan says. What Bhagavan says is, according to our prarabdha, whatever needs to be done by this body, speech, or mind, he will make this body, speech, or mind do. It doesn't mean that all actions done by our body, speech, or mind are actions made to be done by him, because there are two forces driving our the actions of our body, speech, and mind. The actions that we're made to do according to prarabdha are his will. But there's another important factor where we started this discussion. The problem we face is our will. So long as until we have surrendered our will completely to him, we have a separate will of our own. So our body, speech, and mind is not only being driven by the will of God, it's also being driven by our will. Sometimes our will happens to be attuned to the will of God. Supposing it's our destiny to study and become a doctor. Most people who become doctors want to become a doctor for one reason or other. They may want to become a doctor because they think it's a very noble profession. They can help other people, or they may want to become a doctor because they think they can earn a lot of money by being a doctor, or they may want to become a doctor because the social prestige of being a doctor. Whatever it is, most people who study to become doctors want to become doctors. So not only is it God's will that they are doctors, it's also their will. So even when we are acting according to the will of God, if we are acting also according to our will, we are thereby creating agamya. That is, any actions we do driven by our will are agamya. Some agamya happens to be in line with the will of God, so it seems to bear fruit. Some agamya is not in line with the will of God, so though we try very hard, I want to become a doctor, but however much I try, I keep on failing my exams. It's not the will of God for me to be a doctor. So there are two forces, that the actions of our mind, speech, and body are driven. Those actions that are necessary for us to experience our prarabdha, those actions are being driven by God. But any action, whether they're also driven by prarabdha or they're not driven by prarabdha, most of our actions are driven by our will. That is, whatever we do it because we want to do it, because we are seeking to gain some benefit thereby. So because we are acting according to our will, the actions we do according to our will are what are called agamya. Agamya bears fruit. That fruit is stored as sanchita, and from that sanchita, God selects for each lifetime a prarabdha, certain fruits for us to experience in this lifetime. He selects those fruits that will be most beneficial to our spiritual advantage, to our spiritual progress. So, as Bhagavan often said, whether you call it prarabdha or call it the will of God, it's one and the same thing. That is, what you experience as prarabdha. It may be the fruit of your past actions, but it's the fruit of your past actions selected by God for your benefit. Because in every life, we accumulate far more fruit when we experience prarabdha. So the sanchita is a vast pile. That is the good fruit and bad fruit there. God is free to choose which fruit he gives us to experience in this lifetime. So whatever we call prarabdha, it's the will of God. And particularly when we're on the path of surrender, it's better to view it as the will of God rather than as prarabdha. Of course, they're one and the same thing, but if we give emphasis to the fact that it's the will of God, so whatever happens to me is happening by his will for my own benefit. Whatever happens to my family, to my loved ones, it's all happening by his will for our benefit. So if we accept that, if we're willing to accept that, then only we can truly follow this path of surrender. Then in the next two sentences of this note that he wrote for his mother, what he says in the next two sentences is very, very important. In the second sentence, he says, "Endrum naduvadadu envichikunum nanuvadu. That means what is never to happen will not happen, however much effort we make. There he clearly indicates not everything that we do is according to destiny, because he says that is, we cannot change anything that is destined to happen. If something is not going to happen, however much we try to make it happen, it's not going to happen. So we're free to want what we're not destined to experience. We're free to try to achieve what we're not destined to experience. But however much we want it, however much we try, it's not going to happen. If it's not going to happen, it's not going to happen. It's what Bhagavan says here. And then in the next sentence, he says the same thing the other way around. Ātma-vichara Uڵḷadu. What is to happen, will not stop, however much obstruction we make. That is, there are things that happen in our life, but we don't like, but we don't want to happen. So we can try and obstruct them. Supposing it's something unpleasant, something we consider unpleasant, some accident or some illness or some bereavement or some financial loss or anything. If it's going to happen, it's going to happen, however much we try to stop it happening. And then he says in the fourth sentence, iduveitinam. This indeed is certain. It's absolutely certain. We cannot. What is going to happen is going to happen. What is not going to happen is not going to happen. However much we try to change it, what is going to happen, that alone is going to happen. That means we cannot change the prarabdha even an iota. So what should we infer from that? Trying to change it is futile. So we should surrender our will to his will. We shouldn't have any likes or dislikes of our own. Whatever is to happen, it's happening according to his will. That itself is happiness for us. We shouldn't want anything else. And so he concludes this note to his mother saying, Ahalin monamai irake nandru. Therefore, being silent or silently being is good. What's he mean by being silent here? Obviously, it doesn't mean not doing any action, because the body, speech, and mind will be made to do those actions that they are destined to do. Being silent means not rising as ego with a will of our own. So when we don't rise as ego, we are not identifying ourselves with this body. We're not trying to drive the body, speech, and mind to do things according to our likes and dislikes. So the state of being silent is the state of non-rising of ego. In other words, the state of complete surrender. So Bhagavan is saying the same thing in so many ways, in so many different places. Another place where he indirectly talks about surrender, I talked earlier about verse 25 of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, where he reveals the nature of ego is to be always grasping form. So if instead of grasping form, we try to grasp ourselves, ego will thereby subside. Then in the next verse 26 of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, he says, Ahande undayin anatum undahum. If ego comes into existence, everything comes into existence. If Hande indrail indru anatum. If ego doesn't exist, everything doesn't exist. Ahande yavamam. Ego itself is everything. That is all. Everything we experience is just a dream. The dreamer is ego. Without the dreamer, there's no dream. So when the dreamer rises, it projects a dream. Everything in the dream is nothing other than the dreamer. That is what everything we see in a dream. We see mountains and we see houses, we see cars, we see people, we see oceans, we see so many things. What are all those things? They're all our own mind. We are seeing our own thoughts. We are seeing as all these things. So ultimately, everything is only ego. Ego itself is the seed that expands as all this. Then he says in the final sentence, which is the sentence I want to say here, Adalal yadu idu endrunadale ovadal yavam. Therefore, investigating what this is giving up everything. Why is that? Because as he said in the previous verse, if we investigate this ego, it will take flight. It will subside and dissolve back into its source. So if ego ceases to exist, everything else will cease to exist. So investigating what this ego is giving up everything. So people think that, as Bhagavan said, there are two ways: either investigate yourself or surrender yourself. Though he said that, he made it clear that actually the two are one and the same ultimately. Ultimately, we can't surrender ourselves without investigating ourselves. But to suit people of different mindset, he presented the same one path in two different ways. But whether we follow the path of surrender or the path of vichara, we have to give up everything. So people think superficially, oh, this surrender is easy. So all I have to do, I surrender myself to God, then I don't have to do anything. Surrender is not at all easy. We have to give up everything. We have to let go of everything. We have to have no desire, no expectation. We should want nothing from God. We should just subside back into our source. That alone is surrender. So the path Bhagavan has taught us, though he taught it in two, he presented the same path in two different ways. He presented it as the path of surrender, he presented it as the path of vichara, but he made it clear that ultimately they are one and the same. So if we want to achieve infinite happiness that we are all seeking, we must be ready to surrender ourselves. And surrendering ourselves means surrendering everything. We must be ready to give up everything. So this is the, once we have come to Bhagavan's path, once we have come to Bhagavan, when we understand that this is what, that is, Bhagavan is ready to give us infinite, well, as he said, he's not actually giving us anything because we're already that. We're already infinite happiness, but Bhagavan is ready to restore us to our original state of infinite happiness. But in order to attain that state, we have to pay a very small price. We have to surrender this ego. So long as we're clinging on to this ego, and so long as we cling to anything else, we are thereby clinging on to ego. Because who is it who is clinging to other things? It is ego. So the very nature of ego is urupatri, grasping other things, clinging to other things. So we need to let go of everything, including this ego. Then only we can attain that infinite happiness that we actually are. So sorry, I've again talked for nearly an hour, but if anyone would like to ask any questions, I meant to keep the talk shorter this time, but I got carried away as usual. Sorry.
I think we have a question in the chat window from Neeraji, sir.
Oh, okay. Shall I?
I'll read the question.
Yes, please.
If the mind is somewhat surrendered, why is it that our speech has hindrances in clarity? Or is it not completely aligned with the mind's intention?
Until we are completely surrendered, our surrender is only partial. So as you say, the mind is somewhat surrendered. That is, to some extent, we are giving up our likes and dislikes. When we give up our likes and dislikes, we must have no expectations. So if we experience problems, if we have hindrances in our speech or whatever it may be, if we're not able to express ourselves clearly or whatever, that should be no concern of ours. If Bhagavan wants us to speak clearly, he will make us speak clearly. If he wants us to speak incoherently, he'll make us speak incoherently. It is no concern of ours. Our only concern should be to surrender to him. But generally speaking, clarity of speech comes out of clarity of mind. For example, if we're talking about Bhagavan's teachings, if our understanding of Bhagavan's teachings is clear and deep, we'll be able to express it clearly in words. If our understanding is not so clear, we'll we'll stumble a bit when we're trying to express it in words. So the clarity of speech is, generally speaking, it's dependent on the degree of clarity of mind. The clearer the mind, the clearer will be the speech. However, that's as a general rule. There are some people who have speech impediments. They may be very, very sharp-minded, but they may, for example, have a stammer. Or there are so many different types of speech impediments that people have. If someone has a speech impediment, they may not be able to express themselves clearly in speech, even though they very clearly understand. So I'm not sure whether when you talk about hindrances in speech, what type of hindrances you're talking about. Would you like to clarify that, and then maybe I can answer more?
Michael, we may read and understand, and yet sometimes the flow channel of speech is not clear, and this is not only with Bhagavan's teachings; it may be with other subjects as well.
Yes.
And sometimes, we intend to be kind, but somehow the speech doesn't come out like that. It seems as if it lacks kindness. So is it lack of surrender, or is it lack of something? I don't know.
About kindness, yes. Often we are well-intentioned, but sometimes we say things that are inappropriate. We don't mean to hurt someone, but we sometimes may, for some reason or other, say something that we think it's the appropriate thing to say, but it may be the inappropriate thing to say, because we never know how others are going to take our words. We may be talking with the best of intentions, or it's the same with our actions. We may act with the best of intentions, but our intentions may be misunderstood by other people. That is, again, this is a matter, we're on the path of surrender. We have to leave, as Krishna says in the Gita, you have the right to react to action, not to the fruit thereof. So when we act, we try to act with the best of intentions. We don't mean to harm people. We don't mean to hurt people. We generally try to act with good intention. But sometimes our actions may be taken otherwise by other people. That's out of our hand. We have to leave that to Bhagavan. So we should act as far as possible with good intention. We should not do anything with bad intention. But even though we act with good intention, our actions may have an effect other than the effect we wanted them to have. That is in Bhagavan's hands. So so long as we have this sense of doership, we have to try to act in a way that seems appropriate to us, and we act with good intention. But it may sometimes have other consequences. That is it. If that is the case, okay, we have to accept that is Bhagavan's will. So we have to remember, on this path of surrender, our aim is to surrender our will and to accept whatever happens as his will. So if we do something with good intention, but it has a contrary effect, okay, that is Bhagavan's will. We just have to accept that. About clarity, as I said, generally speaking, if you want to master a subject, speaking about it is a very good way to do so. Speaking or writing about it is a very good way to do so, because when we try to express ourselves in words, whether in writing or in speech, we become aware of the weaknesses in our own understanding, and it makes us think about the subject more deeply. That is, it's relatively easy. For instance, with Bhagavan's teaching, just as an example, I mean, it applies to any subject. We can read it and we can understand to some extent, and we can convince ourselves, yes, this is the case. But if we try to explain it to someone else, it's much easier to convince ourselves than it is to convince others. In order to convince others, we have to be very, very clear in what we say. Ramakrishna Paramahamsa said, to kill oneself, a small blade is sufficient. To kill others, you need a sword and a shield, and you need so many powerful weapons. So like that, if we want to help others, it's much more difficult to help others than it is to help ourselves. So first and foremost, why we are studying Bhagavan's teachings in order to understand them ourselves. And merely studying Bhagavan's teaching, merely thinking about them is necessary, but it's not sufficient. We will understand his teachings correctly only to the extent we put them into practice. So the more we put them into practice, the more clearly and deeply we will understand them. The more clearly and deeply we understand them, the more we can express them to others. It's inevitable. If we are following this path, we meet fellow devotees, and sometimes we'll have discussions, and sometimes people have difficulty understanding things, so we try to explain to them. It's a good exercise for us trying to explain, as I say, because that makes us think more deeply. That makes us try to view things from other perspectives. How this other person may be viewing it. That is, if I want to explain something to you, I have to try to put myself in your shoes. If I assume that you already know certain things, though I may be explaining very clearly, you won't be grasping it because certain basics you haven't understood. So I first have to understand where you're coming from, at what level you are approaching this subject. That's why often it's best to, like I've just given a 1 hour talk without considering at all to what extent other people can grasp it. If we've been having a dialogue, if you've been asking me questions and I've been answering, I would have to adapt what I say to suit your level of understanding. That's why often we can explain things better by a dialogue rather than a monologue. I hope what I said today was clear to everyone, but it may not be. I mean, maybe I can't say because it wasn't a dialogue. If you've been asking me questions and I've been answering, I'd have a better idea of whether I'm pitching what I'm saying at the right level. So, but Bhagavan's teachings, it's a very, very deep and subtle subject. So communicating it to others is not easy because what seems clear to us may not be at all clear to others. Particularly this is the case in such a deep and subtle subject as Bhagavan's teachings. That is generally, we assume people who've been studying Bhagavan's teaching understand what he means by self-investigation. But sometimes we're surprised. People who think they've been following his path for years, they suddenly say something and we understand, oh, they're not at all understanding what Bhagavan is saying. So it's a very, very difficult subject to communicate effectively. But it all depends upon, it depends, any communication, it's a two-way process. There's the one who's communicating and the one who's receiving. Both have to be well attuned. So if I try to explain something that is not attuned to your way of thinking, you're not going to grasp it. So you have to attune yourself to what I'm saying. I have to attune what I'm saying to your ability of grasping. So communicating is a challenge. So I don't know whether I've answered your question or not, but
yes, you have. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. So we have one more question coming in for you from our YouTube viewer, Mr. TV Murali. He's asking, and I quote the question, quote, if prarabdha is God's will, can our present good karma positively influence God's will? Unquote.
Nothing can positively influence God's will because God's will is always positive. Whatever God, because he is all knowing, all loving, and all powerful, that is, because he's all loving, whatever he wants for us is what is good for us. So there's no need for us to positively influence his will. Whatever he has ordained for our prarabdha is what is best for us. We may think, oh, this is a terrible thing that's happened to me. But if it's happened to us, it cannot have happened to us without his will. Because he's all knowing, nothing can happen without his knowledge. Because he's all powerful, nothing can happen without his consent. So whatever happens to us is according to his will. And because he's all loving, it can only be what is good for us. So whatever happens to us, even if it seems bad in our view, it's actually what is good for us. That's one thing. The other thing is, we are on the path of surrender. In the path of surrender, we are trying to surrender our will to the will of God. If we want God to do what we want him to do, if we want him to change our prarabdha in a way that we consider favorable, we are not surrendering our will to him. We are asking God, please surrender your will to me. Let my will be done, not your will, my will. That is the complete opposite of surrender. So if we're on the path of surrender, we shouldn't want anything from God. Our aim is to surrender our will to the will of God, not my will, your will. Because that is the wise course. Because who knows better? Does this little mind, with its narrow view, know what is best, or does God know what is best? Obviously, God knows what is best. So the wise thing is to surrender our will to the will of God, because whatever he wills is what is good for us. Whatever we will may not be good for us. We want so many things, but actually are not at all good for us. We think they're good for us because we've got our view is very, very narrow, very limited view we have. His view is unlimited. So he alone knows what is best for us. Sadhu Om has sung another song. Ena vendum, ena vendam, embadeyalam, ene vidya nangarindo em perumane. What is needed and what is not needed, rather than me, the one who knows very well what is needed and what is not needed, is only my Lord. So we're on the path of surrender. We need to, on the path of surrender, we need to recognize that God alone knows what is best for us. Whatever happens is according to his will and is therefore what is best for us. So why should we want God to serve when God has carefully selected our prarabdha in a way that will be best for us? Why should we want God to change our prarabdha? If he changes our prarabdha, it won't be better than, it'll be something worse, because he's already chosen what is best for us. So we should accept our prarabdha as his sweet will. Whatever happens, it is his will, it is what is good for us. So long as we have any idea that God should change my prarabdha in a favorable way, I should do good karma in order to influence God positively, we are not surrendering to God. We are still expecting things from God. So we are still at the early stages of devotion. That is, as I said, the early stages of devotion. We don't love God for his own sake. We love him for the sake of what we can get from him. So our bhakti is not Ishvara bhakti, it is Vishaya bhakti. We have to, slowly our Vishaya bhakti has to mature into Ishvara bhakti. We have to love God for his own sake.
So I think we have a last question coming in from our YouTube viewer. Our YouTube channel is actually quite active and has more viewers than the Zoom channel. I quote the question from Germana Di Paolo. I quote, once you explained about the Anand sheath becoming Ananda itself, could you explain that again? Unquote.
Okay. Anandamaya kosha is a sheath. A sheath means it's something other than ourselves. The reason the Anandamaya kosha, what does the Anandamaya kosha consist of? It consists of our vasanas. Vasanas means our inclination. They are the seeds that rise as likes, dislikes, desires, and attachment. Most of our vasanas, that is generally speaking, our vasanas are what are called Vishaya vasanas. They're inclinations towards Vishayas. When we are following this spiritual path, we are trying to weaken our Vishaya vasanas and strengthen what is sometimes called sattvasana. Sattvasana means the inclination just to know and to be what we actually are. That is what is otherwise called bhakti. So we are trying to cultivate bhakti and vairagya. Vairagya means freedom from, or to the extent that our vishaya vasanas are weakened, to that extent we have vairagya. So that all those vasanas, both the vishaya vasanas and the sattvasana, they all constitute what is called the Anandamaya kosha. Why is it called the Anandamaya kosha? Because what motivates all desires, all likes, dislikes, and so on, is our desire for happiness. As Bhagavan says, Priyataku Sukhame Karanam Adalalam, since happiness alone is the cause for love. So the Anandamaya kosha is the sheath of love, it's our will. It's what we desire, what we want. It can all our likes, dislikes, desires, attachments, loves, hatreds, all these things in their seed form are the vasanas, and that the vasanas are what constitutes the Anandamaya kosha. It is only a kosha, but what we actually are, our real nature, is not a kosha. It is infinite happiness. A kosha is something limited. We have our desires are all limited. Our real nature is infinite happiness, infinite love. So we shouldn't mistake the kosha. Just because the word ananda is there, doesn't mean that it is the infinite happiness that we actually are. It's only a kosha. A kosha means it's something other than ourselves. Like all the 5 koshas, as Bhagavan said, they're all jada and asat. The jada means they have no awareness of their own. The asat means they've got no existence of their own. They exist only in the view of ourself as ego. So this Anandamaya kosha is the ego's will. Now our aim is to surrender our will to the will of God. True happiness can be found only in the will of God, not in our will. Our will always get us into trouble. So it's only by surrendering our will to the will of God that we can experience the infinite happiness that we actually are. I hope that answers that to some extent. So we shouldn't confuse Anandamaya kosha with Ananda in its pure form.
That's about it, Michael. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you so much today.
Okay.
Again, it was a wonderful session. I think you took great care and shared deep insights into an area which has been one of the more debated ones: the roles of prarabdha, destiny, surrender, ego.
Yes.
And I am still getting prompts and questions on the YouTube channel, but we'll hold them off for the time being, and perhaps we can build on the same topic next month onwards.
Yes, maybe next month if people want to ask, because the last few sessions I've been talking a lot. Maybe I should just answer questions, because that makes it more interactive.
Sure. So perhaps we can hold a Q&A session only with the devotee.
Yes, that would be good. Particularly on self-surrender and self-investigation, because this is the very heart of Bhagavan's teachings.
Sure. We will do that. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Nāṇ Ār.